If you enjoy the channel and our video content and would like to support us, you can do this in a couple of ways. You can sign up to our Patreon site, which is a monthly subscription to one of our 4 tiers, each giving you something different from early access interviews up to exclusive unseen footage. There's also the option of a one-off donation via PayPal, which allows you the option to donate an amount of your choice. Both options really help to keep this channel going and to continue putting out regular content for you good folk. So please take a look at aircrewinterview.tv/donate, and I thank you in advance. Thank you and enjoy. This has fascinated me. Obviously, you flew you went onto the F-18 Charlie, the Legacy Hornet. How did that happen from an E-2 pilot to go into a Hornet? Like, can you tell us about that transition?
Yeah, so much like I referred to before about how the Navy manned their selection process in flight school poorly, there were times when they were short at certain rank levels in different communities, because again, they didn't manage it from the start. So one day, and at the time I had gotten all my qualifications. It was my last deployment in the E-2. I'd gotten all my qualifications as a E-2 pilot that I could possibly get. I had all my qualifications as an LSO that I could possibly get. I had got my master's degree on the side just because I wanted everything on my resume, not that we really called it that, to give me the best shot, but I didn't know if I was ever going to get the shot. And one day I was walking out, it was my wave day as an LSO, and I'm walking out to go catch some aircraft, and our CAG, the guy who's in charge of the whole air group, Navy captain, is walking the other way. Fantastic leader, probably one of the best, if not the best people I worked for in my time. And I knew him because I was an LSO, so I would grade his passes.
Yes, of course, yeah.
To kind of give a picture of who this individual was, he was like 6'4". He had a beautiful mustache. He would smoke wherever he wanted to on the ship because he was a Navy captain and he did not care. And prior to us, he was the skipper of a Hornet squadron, but in between that and coming to us, he was actually the skipper of Top Gun, like the school. Wow. This guy was, I referred to him as like a fighter pilot from that stereotype back in the day. And we're about to pass each other. He's like, "Hey, Wombat, I got a question for you." And I was like, "Yeah, what's up, sir?" And he's like, "Hey, have you ever thought about flying fighters?" And I looked at him without zero filter in what I thought. And I was like, "Well, sir, once you've flown the E-2, that's the pinnacle." And he looked at me, he didn't miss a beat. He's like, "Okay, cool." And he turns to walk. And I was like, whoa. I was like, I was kidding. And he was like, "Oh, okay." He's like, "Well, come talk to me later." And what the Navy had done is every year they do 2 boards for transitions, right? Just systematically, but they don't necessarily pick people up because it's needs of the Navy. Well, they had a huge need for basically lieutenants, O3s. So they were like, "We're going to do 1 board and we're going to pick up 20 people from different communities." Mm-hmm. And he had heard about it. He thought that I'd be a good fit. So he encouraged me to apply. He said he would recommend me. The skipper of the ship, who also was a former Tomcat fighter pilot, recommended me. And it just worked out that, one day I had gone on, because these boards take a while, I had gone on to my shore tour as an instructor down in Kingsville flying the T-45. And I'll never forget it. It was a Friday afternoon, getting ready to walk on a training flight. And they had civilian people that worked in the squadron, in the administrative roles and things like that. And this woman who was super nice walks up to me and she kind of squints and looks at my name tag. She's like, "I have something on my desk for you." And I'm like, what is it? And she's like, "Well, it's on there. It's a big manila envelope." And I'm like, okay. So, I told my student, we had already briefed. We were literally walking down. I was like, "Give me a second." So I ran down there, I opened it, and it was basically my orders to go transition to F-18s. Wow. And I walked back to the student and he's like, "Sir, is everything okay?" I was like, "Dude, as long as you don't kill me today, like, you're passing this flight. Like, I don't care. Let's go have a good time." And I was on cloud 9 because it was my dream shot, Yeah. And so that's how it all went down. And that weekend was a blur with a lot
I can imagine.
But it was a pretty cool feeling to get one of those spots. So.
Yeah, and what is it common from the E2, C2 types to go onto fighters?
Not in the Navy. So a lot of my Air Force buddies have done transitions and things among communities, and but the Navy, it's really rare. And I'm not saying that from an egotistical standpoint, because God knows no pilot needs to be more egotistical. But it was just rare because they had invested so much money into you on that platform.
Yeah.
To then put even more money into you on something else is it really just doesn't make sense, to be honest with you. But again, needs of the Navy, and it worked out. And I think I know personally maybe 3 people, including myself, that have done it in my 20-year career. So
wow, is that
not counting people that like say they flew a platform that went away, right? When the Tomcat went away, obviously guys transitioned. When the S3s went away, people transitioned. But for people that took a platform that's still actively flying and just left it, it's pretty rare. So.
And how did you find the transition, obviously going from like the E2 into like kind of the fighter world? Did you find they were like nice to you? Like how was that for you, like personally?
It was weird. Going through the training was great because timeline wise, a lot of the instructors were my buddies from flight school. So that was really cool. When I got to my first squadron, I found it was an extreme one way or another. I would have people, and the majority of the people were great. My skipper, my XOs, they were all great. They really embraced, and they knew my strengths. You know, they knew, hey, I'm a new guy and I don't know things tactically and I can kind of fly the plane, but I do have combat experience. I have the bigger picture. I was a division officer. I had done scheduling. I've done all this, so they could use those aspects. Because again, in the Navy, the flying is just one aspect of the officer job. Yes. There was a couple that weren't. And one in particular literally sat me down, who was higher ranking than me, and told me flat out he did not like transition guys. And he said that I took a spot away from somebody that deserved it and all this stuff. And we butt heads the whole time in that squadron. And I don't know what it was. I don't know what I did. But we just.
And how did you how did you handle that when he said that to you? Did you just say okay, or did you?
It was really interesting because I was kind of shocked by it, to be honest with you, that somebody would start, in 10 seconds he introduced himself, and then now he's saying this, and it's like that's really bizarre, So I knew a couple of the guys, a couple of the junior officers in the squadron, and I kind of talked with them in confidence, and they all kind of were like, yeah. That's who he is, So it was his personality. It's just that's how he took it out on me. With a guy like that or a girl like that, I just did my job. That's all you could do is do your job. From childhood, my father taught me the difference between right and wrong, and I did that. I did the right thing, and if he disagreed with it, like I remember vividly a conversation that happened in our ready room one day. We're sitting in Lemoore, and the fog had rolled in, so nobody's flying. You can't even see the jets on the flight line. That's how thick the fog gets there. And my buddy is on duty officer, and I'm having some lunch, and we're just talking. We had some maintenance issues with our jets because they were getting old. I mean, they weren't. So we were kind of having this little game of like, well, would you take a jet if this was broken, or would you take a jet if this was broken? Just because there's nothing else to do. Yeah. And this guy who happened to be the division or the maintenance officer at the time was his side job, who didn't like me. He's sitting in the corner eating lunch, and my buddy goes, well, how about this one? He goes, you walk out to the jet and the ejection seat is armed. It's not safe. He goes, do you take the jet? And I go, where are we? And he goes, what do you mean? I go, are we here in Lemoore and it's a training flight, or are we on the ship and it's a combat flight? And he goes, both. And I go, on the ship in combat, I safe the seat up, I talk to the plane captain, I do a good pre-flight, and I go, because there's a mission and there's a job that needs to be done, and there's guys and girls on the ground that we have to support. I go, Lemoore, I don't take it. And he goes, why is the difference? And I go, because I don't know what else they missed, right? I have no idea. I mean, so when you think about our procedures at the time, the previous pilot is supposed to safe that up when he taxis in. So that's one person that missed it. The plane captain that caught the plane is supposed to check that. That's 2. The plane captain that's launching the plane was supposed to catch it. So that's 3. What else didn't they all catch? So, And again, because we were having some of these maintenance issues, I was like, that would be a good teaching point. And if it ruined a sortie, well, maybe we can fix some things. Well, he heard that and went through the roof. He's like, you can't deny it, blah, blah, blah. And we just, at that point, I had been around for a while. And I told him, I was like, I'm the aircraft commander. I go, whether you like it or not, I could walk out to an aircraft and just say, no, period. I mean, that was what the Navy employed in us, is that we had that power to look at a jet and go, nope, not taking it. And that's the ultimate, level of trust. And he didn't like my answer, but there's nothing he could have done about it. So it's just an interesting, different dynamic. And you get that any place you have a lot of type A personalities. Do I think in hindsight he had anything against me? I don't know. Maybe he did. I have no idea. But if he did, I feel bad for him more so, to be honest with you, because that's a hard way to go through life. So
it sounds like almost like if you watch, I'm guessing you have the new Top Gun movie, like Hangman, a bit of arrogance there, that kind of thing.
Yeah, but like misguided arrogance.
Yeah, misguided.
Like for no reason.
Yeah, totally.
It's just like, why are you being that way? Like, it'd be so much easier if we just work together. I don't. But
be a team. Yeah, totally. But I'm going to have to ask you this, Wombat. Your first reheat takeoff or afterburner takeoff in the Hornet. What was that like, getting that kick?
It's pretty awesome. And I never thought you'd feel it, especially at the field. Because I had done like incentive rides at the ship and in a Super Hornet and things like that. And obviously a catapult's a catapult. I mean, it's the coolest roller coaster ride in the world. Cool. But I never thought at the field going down the runway that when you plug the blowers, you would actually feel it. And you do. I mean, it is a kick in the pants. And the story that I tell on that is, we had to, and I'm sure pilots everywhere have to, during training, we had to keep current, right? Yes. So you had to fly every so many days. And we had a rough stretch of weather, and I wasn't on the schedule, and it was like 8 o'clock in the morning. I'm at my condo on the beach, living the single life, I'm a fighter pilot.
Yeah.
And I get a call from the squadron, and they're like, hey, you're going to fall out of currency. Could you just come in and just go up and do what we would call a 1v0? Just go up by yourself and just fly the plane around. You're not doing a mission. You're just staying current. And in my head, I'm thinking like, so you want me to hop in my car, drive to base, take a perfectly fine jet out over the ocean, bend the crap out of it and have fun, and come back and land.
What a pain.
Yeah, and I'm like, yeah, no, I could do that. I mean, like, I think I said yes as I was driving away in my car. So excited. So I get to the squadron and, man up the jet breaks.
Oh.
And so I call, I talk to maintenance. I'm like, do you have any spares? And he's like, sir, we only have one spare, but I don't know if they're going to let you take it. And I'm like, well, why not? And he's like, it's the air show plane. And I'm like, okay. So I call the duty desk on the radio. I'm like, hey guys, my jet's broke. They have a spare, but it's the air show plane. Can I take that? And my buddy from flight school, who's now an instructor, is sitting on duty. And he's like, let me check. And they come back and they're like, look, you could take it. He's like, but dude, be careful. And I'm like, thinking to myself, I'm like, come on, man, I'm a pilot. Like, I have 3 combat tours. Like, I'm not some nugget just out of flight school. Like, give me a little bit of respect, right?
Yes.
What I come to find out is the air show plane is the big motor Charlie. So it's single seat Charlie with the bigger motors, so more thrust. And it is completely slicked off. There's no centerline tank. There's nothing on the wings, nothing on the wingtips, no pylons on the wings. I mean, it was the slickest you could make an F-18 Charlie. And I remember taxiing this thing out. It felt light taxiing.
Really? You could tell the difference.
It was weird. And I taxi onto the runway, and if you look at where Virginia Beach is and Oceana is compared to the coastline, it is right there. And I plug the blowers and go, and I turn out over the ocean just on our normal course rules, and I almost broke Mach 1 before I hit the hotel line.
No way.
That's how fast it was. And I literally, thank God, because I probably wouldn't be talking here with any semblance of my career, saw the number. It hit 0.98 Mach in the HUD, and I pulled the power back to idle, threw the speed brakes out, reefed back on the stick just to keep myself from blowing, because I was pointed at all the hotels at their level as I'm going out. And I was like,
wow.
I flew. It's funny, I have a picture of the logbook. I flew for 32 minutes, and I was out of gas. That's all I had. It was December. I remember that. It was super cold out. I walked back. I was dripping in sweat because of how much fun I had. I mean, you could pull 7.5 Gs and just hold it in that plane because there was, I mean, it had so much power, the thrust. It was so much fun. And, but yeah, you absolutely felt the power, 100%.
And you mentioned the 7.5 there. Is that actually the limit? Or could you, as a pilot, was there a switch where you're like, okay, I'm going to kick this switch off, I can do 9G?
So there's a paddle in the Hornet, and it's on the stick a little bit lower down, and you can actually override it, and it'll give you whatever the airframe will give you at that point, I guess. I never pulled the paddle. I never had a need to pull the paddle. We never really trained to pull the paddle. In my fleet squadron, I had one opportunity that I should have pulled the paddle. We were doing training, and I came very close to a midair between myself and my skipper as we were doing kind of this. It's a long, not to get into the tactics, but I pushed over to miss the midair as he went over the top of me, and I guess the adrenaline dump of like, oh my God, I almost hit him. And then I realized like, oh crap, here's the desert. And I just, both hands on the stick, pulled back for everything that plane would give me.
Yeah.
Never pulled the paddle, which would have made sense. My rat out went below 100 feet in the HUD. And I brought it back and we debriefed it. You know, in Navy fashion, you make mistakes. And I was at fault as much as he was at fault, as much as some of the systems of the jet were at fault. And we fessed up to it, and that's, you learn from it. Mm-hmm. But after we're done doing all that, our training officer's looking at the tape and he goes, dude, why don't you pull the paddle? And I was like, I thought about it. And that's the thing, like in that extremis, in that time compression, I literally thought about doing it. And he goes, why didn't you do it? And I was like, I didn't want to get in trouble. And he's like, so you would have rather flown into the ground? And I was like, well, I wouldn't have gotten in trouble. Like literally, that's how my brain was wired.
Wow.
It was like, rather die than get in trouble. And I mean, so which is stupid. It's completely ridiculous. But yeah, it was the one time I probably should have pulled it and I didn't. Mm-hmm. But other than that, you know, for the most part, the Hornet's a really smart plane. The Super Hornet even more so, to where it knows based on your loadout and stuff how much you can actually pull. Mm-hmm. So you just use the systems.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But obviously, you kind of mentioned a few things there. But what would you say the strengths and weaknesses of the legacy model are on the Hornet?
So, one, it's a legacy. I mean, that's its biggest strength, right? It's seen combat. It's done things. I'm not saying the Super Hornet isn't a good plane. I have been quoted as saying there's nothing super about a Super Hornet, but
I've heard that before.
It's a fine aircraft. They had to do some things to it as far as the weapon loadouts that it could hold that really made it less capable, unless you were using those weapons, which we typically didn't. It's funny, you know, they would joke that Charlie guys, legacy guys, were always worried about their fuel. Mm-hmm. But in reality, the Charlie was a very fuel-efficient airplane. And a lot of times when we would train, we would go on mixed sections where I'm being led by a Super Hornet, you know, whether it's an Echo or Foxtrot, or I'm leading one of them. And it almost seemed like they always had to get gas before I did.
Oh,
and
wow.
It's like, what are we doing? You know, so I don't know if we were just taught how to be better with fuel management, possibly. But it was a very slick airplane, which was super fun to fly, even with configurations. You know, there were instances where I had 3 drop tanks on it for training, and I could still go through Mach 1.
Wow.
I mean, it was just
really
insane. Yeah, we did one. We're doing carrier quals as part of our workups off San Diego. My jet broke. I needed to get 2 traps during the day so I could go that night. I switch into a spare. Maintenance is like, it's a 3 wet. And I'm like, a 3 wet? We never fly 3 wets. And he's like, well, sir, it's set up for that because they had just flown it from the beach. So they would load up all the drop tanks they were taking. And I was like, but it's empty, right? He's like, no. And I'm like, so I've got like 6,000 pounds of extra gas plus internal. And as soon as I get the engines online, the air boss is screaming at me like, turn downwind off the catapult, come right around. Because it was getting really close to sunset. And I was like, sir, I have to go dump gas. Like, I've got to get rid of this gas. So he's like, make it quick. So, you know, full blower, take off. I kept it in blower at 500 feet. And a couple miles up ahead of the ship, I went through Mach 1. And it shocked me that the plane could do it. So it was really cool and capable in that. Coming from the Hawkeye, I had a true appreciation for a plane that had systems that were designed to help the pilot, because the E-2 really didn't. So like the autopilots and just the different modes of things were amazing, but they had to, because the mission was such that you didn't have time to focus on that. You know, if you're in combat and you're going to drop a JDAM, you had like a 12 to 15 page checklist you had to go through to set all the systems up. You know, the last thing you need to be thinking about is flying the plane at that point.
Yes.
You know, you're really managing it. So I really enjoyed that about the plane. Like I said, they were getting a little bit old when I started flying them. So originally designed as a 6,000 hour fighter. Some of ours were already on their 10,000 hour waivers.
Crikey.
So, I mean, you're doubling the lifetime of that plane. You know, obviously they would go do long-term maintenance and redo things on it, but I mean, they were just getting beat up. More so the compound, I don't want to say emergencies, but compound malfunctions. You know, I had one off the catapult at night. I hit the end of the catapult and I lose everything. Like dark, nothing. And I have no idea whether I've just lost both motors or if it's just electrical. But because the Hornet is such a great plane, you just plug the blower and put the stick back and you can climb. And I literally climbed straight up until I could see the horizon and leveled off and started troubleshooting things and getting things back and came back aboard. So just, you know, it was just, they were worn out because they had been flown so much, but they were such a capable plane. I'd say the biggest negative from at least the U.S. Navy and how we came in our history is the Hornet represented the first aircraft that was a multi-role. Mm-hmm. You know, the Tomcat was, I mean, they tried to at the end make it air to ground, but it was never really meant for that. You know, it was a pure air to air fighter. The A6, my favorite, the Intruder, I mean, it was a bomb truck. I mean, those things in Vietnam could do things that were amazing. And the Hornet was that combination, you know, and in some aspects that's great. I mean, you know, it's designed as an aircraft that you could take off, hit the tanker, fight your way into an air war, drop bombs, fight your way out, hit the tanker, and land on the ship. I mean, all in one plane. But because of that, you know, it's kind of that jack of all trades, master of none. Yeah. So, you know, while it could do it all, and the Super Hornet went on to even add a tanking role that we use, which is putting hours on our Super Hornets at a ridiculously, alarmingly fast rate for no reason. You know, there were other platforms out there that if the Navy had managed it differently, might be able to do them better. You know, the S-3 was a fantastic, even if you just made that a tanker, was a fantastic tanker aircraft, you know, or ship compared to a Super Hornet, you know, things like that. So, you know, kind of its biggest strengths were also its weaknesses, and the fact that we tried to jam so much. You know, I remember my first training flight off of the ship in workups after I had gone through all of the Hornet training, got out to my fleet squadron in Lemoore. Okay, we're going to go out for a month on the Nimitz at the time. It was my old ship. And I remember the first flight that was not carrier quals. They're like, okay, so what you're going to do is you're going to take off, you're going to hit the tanker, then we're going to join up, we're going to do simulated air-to-air, we're going to simulate drop a bomb on this point, we're going to simulate air-to-air on the way back, hit the tanker, come back and do a night trap. And I'm like, what? Dude, you just summed up like 8 months of training that I just did in one flight. Like, and it was, I mean, that flight was 2.5 hours long, and it felt like 4 minutes. I mean, it felt like you were just doing something constantly. So, you know, again, it's great, but there's definitely some weakness to that as well. So
I'm going to get down to our favourite point in for our viewers on the channel, DACT. How did the F-18 fare against, you know, the F-15s, 16s, or whatever you fought in your time?
You know, it was funny, and I've done a lot of different stuff. You know, I even consider flying against a Super Hornet kind of, you know, that same thing, because it's a very different aircraft. The Hornet actually, you know, it obviously has its weakness or its strengths in that, and the fact that, you know, it could fly really slow. I mean, that was our game, right? If I can get my plane, like amazing, it was ridiculous. It was ridiculous how slow you can get that thing. And if you were fighting another Hornet and you got in kind of that slow speed fight, I mean, it blew my mind how slow you can fly a fighter jet and have it controlled. And one of the things that really stuck with me, and it applies today, even in my civilian job of flying in the Airbus, fly-by-wire. I didn't really have an appreciation for that fly-by-wire. I mean, the E-2, if you pulled floorboards, you'd see the cables. You know, I mean, it was a very conventional cable and hydraulic aircraft. and the Hornet was not. And I remember vividly one time I was in a high alpha fight, and I was slightly defensive, shocking. And I looked over and I'm like, I want to go over there, right? So in my stupid pilot brain, I'm like, well, aileron makes me turn, right? And I happen to have my mirrors set up, and I jammed the aileron over to get over there. The ailerons never moved, but the rudder kicked over because the plane knew if it gave me ailerons, I would have spun. But if it just kicked the rudders, it could slime me over. And that was the biggest appreciation of like, I'm really just a voting member in this plane. But once you learn that, you could exploit weaknesses of other aircraft so quickly because, Mover will tell you, the F-16 is the best because it could just sit there at 9Gs and whatever. And I would let him sit at 9Gs because I know the pilot's going to wear out quick. So he could go nuts on that. I flew against the F-15s. Fantastic, but they're just such a big aircraft that it just takes a while, and some people I've talked to kind of equated it to how the Tomcat used to fight, and that it's just this big plane that it takes time. I mean, no matter what, obviously they have tons of thrust, but in that time that they're trying to use all that thrust to turn, I can get my nose around and take care of them. So I did a little bit with the F-22, and that was humbling. Not fair.
I can imagine.
It's just not fair. I think it was two merges with an F-22, and it was laughable. I'm like, okay, this is not
we're not we're not playing
anymore.
Like
in a gunfight, and you brought a bow and arrow. Like, it's like, dude, come on. Like, this isn't, So it was cool, but until you really understood the role and what you can exploit, I thought the Hornet fared fairly well. Obviously, I've never done air-to-air combat in true combat, so how it would have equated, with weapon loadouts and things like that. I mean, in reality, you're going to jettison all that the minute you're actually fighting for your life.
Of course, yeah.
But I really do think, just by the fly-by-wire and the flight control systems, that it was a pretty impressive plane for what it was in the air-to-air arena. Now, obviously, the later models and the Super Hornets with their radars and helmets and AIM-9X, and I mean, my God,
it's crazy, isn't it?
Forget it. I mean, it's insane. But but the little Charlie, she still did pretty darn good
and she's still going strong with the Swiss, the fins, and
I love it. I love seeing it on social media. I cannot see enough pictures of legacy Charlies because they're all gone out of the Navy, and it breaks my heart. So.
Yeah, I'm actually going to Riyadh in July, and I think there's a Spanish Charlie flying, and I think the Swiss Hornets flying as well. So I'm going to
take lots of pictures.
Oh, will do. I'll send you them Wombat. But before we wrap up this part, did you ever get to do an afterburner fly past over the carrier in the Hornet?
I did. So I've done my fair share of flybys of different Navy ships and of the carrier, and the Hornet's a blast. Again, it's easier to fly. People love it. Super Hornet was the same way. Everybody comes up on the flight deck to see it. You can get yourself in a lot of trouble really quickly because unlike the E-2, at least the variant I flew, there was no reporting systems. I have plenty of friends who got extra duty because
really?
The CAG is like, you will not go below this altitude. They do a flyby, they pull the tapes, and it's like right there in the HUD.
Yeah.
Below it. So I think that actually kind of took some of the fun out of it because you couldn't push it as much. Now, on some of the smaller ships, they just wanted to show. But I mean, the carrier you had to watch because you knew the skipper of the ship was a pilot. The CAG was a pilot. They're always watching, and they're trying to keep everybody safe. And
so you had to behave yourself.
The leadership had changed so much. I was in a different air wing with different leaders. That fighter pilot mentality that I told you was gone from my second time. So
yeah,
it was definitely a different time. But I did get my fair share and had my fun, and it's worth it for sure.
Definitely. So how would you sum up your time on the Hornet?
I think I got to do everything I wanted to do. It was an absolute blast. It was a privilege that I was able to do it, especially coming from the E-2. I wouldn't have changed a thing. I wouldn't have gone Super Hornets. I wouldn't have done any of that. I'm happy that I can say that I flew the Legacy. One day a Super Hornet will have some cool nickname like that too, I'm sure. But I was happy to, that lineage and the history of the people that have flown the Charlie goes back a while. and it's done some really cool things. So I'm proud that I got to do that for sure.
But you're also an author, Wombat, Treason Flight. Can you tell us about this and how this book came about?
Yeah, so much like everything else in my career, I kind of fell into this accidentally. I got this idea in 2017 that I was going to write an autobiography because if you haven't picked up on it, I'm a pilot, and that means I'm the coolest person I know. And so I was going to write this autobiography and tell my story to the world. I wrote one chapter, and to her defense, my wife, I told her that idea, and she's like, "You're not that cool. Like, you're."
Yeah, of course. You need to bring you down a peg.
Yeah, you don't. Are you sure you want to do that? That was her response. Get the toast. And I'm like, you don't know. Once you read it, you'll be like, wow. I wrote one chapter and I threw it out. I'm like, this is dumb. That's not what I wanted to do. So, one of the things, so a lot of people, hey, what movies did you grow up with? And people in my time frame are always like the original Top Gun, which I'm not saying I didn't watch it and haven't watched it hundreds of times and can quote it just like everybody else that loves aviation. But one of the movies that I really enjoyed was Flight of the Intruder.
Yes.
That was something that just, it spoke to me differently. And I did some research a long time ago about Stephen Kuntz and who he was and how he wrote that book. And essentially, to summarize it, what he did, he was an A-6 pilot in Vietnam in the Navy, and he heard all these stories, and some things happened to him and all that. And what he did is he took all these stories and he put it on one fictional character, and that was Flight of the Intruder. So I'm like, well, I've seen some stories. So the first thing I did is I did a search of fictional books about the E-2. And you will find one, and that's it. So nobody has ever written a fictional story about the E-2. So I knew that I had kind of a niche there where I didn't, have a lot of competition in that field, which is good. And I kind of took his premise and paid a little bit of homage to that idea. So I took and I created Rattler and took all these stories and some things like the prologue that actually happened to me. Took a piece of advice that my father always gave me, which was never let the truth get in the way of a good story. Yes. Sprinkled a little bit of that on there. And Treason Flight came out of it. And you basically have a story about an E-2 pilot on a combat deployment that's dealing with all of the stuff that every pilot, frankly, any military pilot deals with, but definitely any Navy pilot on the ship. But then there's a twist to it. And that's kind of the interesting thing. So when it first came out, or when it was about to come out, I would tell people that my goals were to make the E-2 sexy, which I think I did, clearly, because they put it in the Top Gun movie. That was obviously from the book. And I wanted it to be a story you'd never heard before. Because to me, in aviation, especially fiction aviation, there's a lot of repeats of the same story where, if you read a lot of it, you can almost go, well, that idea came from this book and that idea came from this book. And I didn't want any of that. I wanted this to be a story that you've never heard before. And it starts out that way it's a book actually about leadership is what it is. It's not with an aviation twist to it. So that's basically where it came from.
And can we find where can we find it? Have you got your own website? Is it on Amazon?
So I do. So when I did this, I was originally just going to do an ebook, right? And I'm like, how hard's that? I've written papers before. I have files of papers. Let's write an ebook. And then somebody was like, well, are you going to have it in a hard or like a paperback? And I was like, sure. And then my dad's like, well, I need a hard copy version. And I was like, oh. And then, so I got all those figured out. And then my wife is like, well, are you going to do an audiobook? And I'm like, oh God. So now I got that done, and I did not read the audiobook. I went to a professional for that, but it's available in all of those formats. I do have a website. It's trmatson.com. It's about the easiest thing. You can Google. I just realized TR Matson, and I am like the first 12 hits on Google. So, which is crazy. It is on Amazon in every different possible format you could want it in, and all that. So it's kind of somewhat taken off a little bit, which is exciting, and
brilliant.
And we'll see. So.
Yes, I'll link everything in the description below for you guys if you want to get the book or follow Wombat. But I've got a couple of personal questions if you're happy with this. So here we go. Do you have any hobbies apart from aviation?
I am a huge car guy, and I really like working out. Those are my two things that I spend. If I'm not, obviously working my day job, I would say my time is family number one, and then I try to work out every day. I've built a gym in my garage, which people on social media have seen, and
your
some
Instagram
really like.
account.
And then I'm a huge car guy. My dad was an auto mechanic, so I grew up around cars. I know a lot of people that follow me know about the Shelby that I have, and I just added a new car to the stable as well that I haven't really said anything about yet. But it is. I'm a car guy. I just can't get it. My wife says I have a problem, and I don't disagree with her on that one. So
it's a good problem.
It is a good problem. So it's a fun problem.
But obviously, you mentioned, before I move on to the next question, obviously, like social media, I follow you on Instagram. Can you let our followers, our viewers know, like, your handle so they can
sure.
See your gym?
I think so everything, I'll become famous for my gym, which will be funny when that's not what I'm trying. Whatever. Hey, I'll take it wherever I get it. I think everything I've got, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook is all TR Mattson author. I tried to keep it simple, just because I know people have, weird underscore things like that. And so TR Mattson author should get you everywhere on every platform that at least I know about, and try to put out there as much stuff as possible. But, yeah.
Brilliant. Favorite aircraft you have flown?
You ready for this one?
Go on.
The E-2.
Okay, I knew it was going to be the E-2, but I thought
I'm gonna get a lot of crap for that from people with the Hornet. The Hornet was a blast, but the E-2 was my first love, and there's just something about it. There's just so many memories and all that. It's an amazing piece of machinery that doesn't get any love. So
absolutely, yeah, need some love. One you would love to fly, past or present?
So if we go way back, things like a Corsair or something would be fun to get a ride in or to fly, or a P-51 obviously would be fun. I think the F4 would have been a blast, because to me the F4 it's kind of the muscle car of jets, right? Their answer to everything was just tons of thrust. They're like, we don't need wings, we don't need anything. Just put a ton of thrust behind it, and it'll be fine. And so there's definitely a kind of a correlation there with my love of muscle cars. And then any pilot who has ever fired a gun in a plane that doesn't tell you they'd want to fly the A-10 is either lying or a psychopath. Because if I could just go up once and fire that gun, because I know how cool it was in a 20 millimeter, I can only imagine that. So those are my top three.
And I've got a couple of questions from people who put them to me personally, if you're happy to answer them, Wombat. So this is from Jim. Is there any chance we can see a new book coming out in the future?
So book number 2 is in the works. I would say it's about 50% done, first draft. My goal is to get the first draft done by the end of the summer, and then get through the process to get it out. It should be quicker this time because I know the process. But I know it's been a while. There's a couple reasons why. I mean, Treason Flight was May of 2021 is when it came out. So purposely, book 2 was never going to get published before I completely retired from the Navy, because it's a little bit potentially more scandalous. And I wanted to be off the Navy's books before it comes out. And also, and I know other authors have said this, I've always felt this way when I write. When somebody buys my book, any book, or even spends time on my social media site or anything, they're giving me in what I think is the most precious commodity they own, which is their time.
Yes.
So I put a lot of effort to try to make this the most professional product for the person who buys it. Not because they're spending their money on it, because that is important too, but if you're going to sit down and listen to the audiobook or read the book, that's your time that you could be doing something else, and I don't want to disappoint. So
yes.
I'd rather not be the author that's like, hey, here's my 50 books that I have out. I'd rather be the one that gives you something really amazing, but it takes a little bit longer. So
yeah,
that's kind of my take on it. But it is going to happen. The story is all outlined, and about 50% of it's down. So
watch this space. So last question, and it's probably the one everyone wants to know. Where did you get your call sign Wombat from?
So that is a great question that I hear a lot. And it's funny, I get it more from people in the UK and Australia, obviously. People in the US don't care. I don't know why. What I will say is that I could give some hints. It is not what every Australian thinks it stands for, which is funny because every Australian, there's, I guess, whatever, they have a term on what wombats do, and that is not where it came from, I can tell you that. My first port call ever in the Navy was to Perth, Australia, so I think that had something to do with it.
Okay.
And it is actually an acronym, so every letter stands for something. But that's as far as I'm going to go.
Right, so we'll leave that to your imagination, folks.
Yes.
I'm going to have to try and work it out. But yeah, Wombat, thank you very much for coming on the show. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. It's been a blast.
Yeah, thank you very much. Cheers, Matt.
All right, thanks.